Before that day, my life had unfolded in a predictable rhythm. Trucking wasn't just a job for me, it was my way of life. The long stretches on the road, the isolation, the constant motion, it all suited me perfectly. I never expected anything more than the steady hum of the engine beneath me, the endless miles stretching ahead, and the comfort of knowing I had a purpose. But, as it often does, fate has a way of stepping in when you least anticipate it. Years before, I had spent a summer working on a ranch up in North Dakota. I was young, restless, and full of that drive to prove myself. The rancher, a quiet man named Frank, had a way of teaching life lessons without uttering many words. I remember him telling me once, "Opportunities don't come knocking, kid. You either run into them or you don't." At the time, I brushed it off as the ramblings of an old cowboy, not realizing that life would soon show me just how right he was. It wasn't the first time I had stood at a crossroads. Before I got into trucking, I had tried running a small auto repair shop. I had the skills, the tools, and the work ethic, but what I lacked was the patience to manage people. The shop folded after 2 years, and with it, my dream of putting down roots in one place. That failure eventually led me to the open road, where I could depend only on myself and leave the stresses of running a business behind. Looking back, I often wonder if Rachel ever truly loved me, or if I was simply the right fit for the life she envisioned at the time. She had this uncanny ability to shape reality to suit her needs, spinning stories and shifting narratives to stay in control of every situation. And when things didn't go her way, she could paint herself as the victim so convincingly that even she started to believe it. My realization about who she really was didn't come from one major betrayal, but from a slow buildup of small, seemingly insignificant moments, each one adding weight to a truth I had refused to face for far too long. Out on the road, I had plenty of time to think. I often found myself wondering if I had chosen this life or if it had somehow chosen me. There were times I thought about going back to something stable, something ordinary. But each time I considered it, something kept me moving forward. Maybe it was the freedom, or maybe it was fear. Fear of stopping long enough to realize I had no idea what came next. By the time I saw that handwritten sign on the side of the road, "For sale before the county takes it," I had no idea I was about to collide with the biggest turning point of my life. At the time, it seemed like a small, fleeting decision, a moment of curiosity. But looking back, I can see now that it was the moment everything shifted. 5 years ago, purely by coincidence, something extraordinary began. I unknowingly started what would later become the Village of Circumstances Unincorporated. What began as just an unremarkable plot of land in the middle of nowhere blossomed into a thriving community with 349 residents. It wasn't part of any grand plan, but life has a way of taking unexpected turns, and I happened to be in the right place at the right time. That day began like any other. I had just finished delivering a trailer of bandages in Texas that needed sterilization before hitting the market. It was a routine job, just another task to cross off my list. Afterward, I called dispatch to let them know I was ready for a new load. They offered me a pickup that would get me home 2 days earlier than expected, which was an opportunity one couldn't pass up. Rare time at home was always a win. Holding a dangerous goods license made me one of the few qualified for this kind of job. The pickup was close by, just a half-hour away. I refueled and arrived to find the load ready and waiting. I secured it quickly and hit the road again, eager to finish the trip. The drop-off point was just an hour from home, and this assignment paid double the usual rate, a significant bonus. Instead of sticking to the assigned route, I decided to take a shortcut, a calculated risk that shaved miles off the journey and saved valuable time. In trucking, time is money. And with the double pay, every hour I saved was an extra reward. I was making great time, running 5 to 6 hours ahead of schedule. As I neared home, I stopped at a rural intersection and saw a handwritten sign that read, "For sale before the county takes it." Out of curiosity, I followed the signs, eventually ending up at a farmhouse. An elderly couple greeted me warmly, but I could tell they were worried. They explained that they had been leasing their farmland to get by, but rising costs had left them struggling. Selling part of their land was the only option to avoid losing everything. After hearing their story, I called my father, who handled our family trust. We worked out a fair deal to purchase the farm, allowing the couple to stay in their home under a long-term lease with reduced rent. Their relief was evident, and the man's handshake came with a promise of future assistance if needed, a promise that would later prove invaluable. Before I left, I suggested we carve out 10 acres at the intersection for a gas station and convenience store, given how far it was to the nearest town. My father also bought additional surrounding land. During development, We discovered that the property sat above an underground river, capable of supplying water to a population of 50,000. This resource became the backbone of our commercial venture. Meanwhile, I kept up with my trucking schedule. Despite my intentions, delays and rush jobs meant I didn't make it home for another 6 months. Finally, on a Wednesday morning, after a long haul, I parked my truck, prepared to face the consequences of exceeding legal driving hours. But in that moment, all I wanted was to see my wife, Rachel, and our daughters. Driving my newly restored Ford truck, freshly painted midnight black with white lettering, I was excited to surprise Rachel by getting home early. But as I turned onto our street, I noticed an unfamiliar car in the driveway. I instantly recognized it as belonging to Derek Whitman, the boss's son. Derek and I shared the truck cab on alternating shifts, but that's where our similarities ended. He was brash, arrogant, and utterly untrustworthy. I pulled over, unable to look away. Rachel and Derek stepped out of the house, my daughters in tow. Derek was carrying a rig bag, just like any trucker would. My stomach twisted. Then it hit me, the undeniable closeness between Rachel and Derek. They weren't even trying to hide their relationship. It was clear this had been going on for a while. I recorded everything on my phone as they loaded my daughters into the car and drove off, oblivious to my presence. They didn't recognize the truck, and Rachel hadn't been expecting me home. I watched them disappear around the corner, my mind racing with questions and confusion. After sitting there for a moment, I pulled into the driveway, determined to uncover the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. Inside, everything appeared normal. The girls' rooms were neat, yet lived in. The master bedroom looked untouched, my clothes still in the closet, my belongings undisturbed. Even the bed was made, which was odd since the girls had missed the bus. Rachel never rushed to make the bed. Nothing seemed amiss. But if she had spent the night with Derek, where was the evidence? Why had he even been there in the first place? I searched every inch of the house twice. Everything was exactly as it should be, except for one thing. In the kitchen, I noticed a faint glow coming from beneath the door leading to the 3rd floor. That didn't make sense. The 3rd floor was unfinished, more like an attic, with old curtains that were always kept closed. I hadn't been up there in years. But curiosity gnawed at me. If Rachel had simply forgotten to turn off a light, fine. But something about it didn't feel right. I climbed the stairs, hesitated for a second, and then opened the door. My breath caught in my throat. The entire 3rd floor had been completely renovated. Sunlight streamed through an open curtain, which was strange because those curtains were always closed when I was around. But that wasn't the worst of it. This was never supposed to happen. Rachel and I had argued for years about what to do with that space. Now I knew why. She had been planning it all along behind my back. A new master bedroom occupied the space, larger than the one downstairs. 2 massive walk-in closets flanked the suite, and a private sitting area with a TV and DVD player completed the setup. My stomach churned. And then I saw it, a small stack of explicit DVDs on a table beside the couch. Rachel had always been completely against that kind of thing, even refusing to discuss it. Yet here they were. I turned on the TV and hit play. What I saw, I wasn't prepared for. It was homemade, and there she was, my wife, in the video. On her knees, doing things she had always claimed were disgusting, things she had refused to do for me. And she looked like she was enjoying it. My pulse quickened. I turned away, my mind spinning. But then, something caught my eye. A small handmade card on the coffee table. "We love you, Uncle Derek." It was signed by my daughters. My stomach twisted in disgust. Derek wasn't just her lover, he was involved in their lives too. I turned to the bed. The sheets were unmade, and there was lingerie I had never seen before. The air was thick with the scent of sex. My hands trembled as I opened the closets. The first one held men's clothes, far too big for me. The second was full of Rachel's outfits, many of which I had never seen. This wasn't just an affair. This was a life she had built without me. Any doubts I had vanished in that moment. Rachel had never truly chosen me. I had always been second place. My mind raced to my daughters. What had she told them? What lies had they been fed? I pulled out my phone and started recording. I filmed the bed, the closets, the adult DVDs. I held one of Derek's shirts against my chest, showing how much larger it was than mine. I zoomed in on the card with my daughter's handwriting. Then, I turned back to the TV. I rewound the video, recording the exact moment the camera panned up to reveal Derek Whitman's face as he used my wife. Rachel looked happy. She belonged to him. The image of her bouncing on him burned itself into my mind. I clenched my jaw, trying to suppress the fury rising in me. This was all the proof I needed. I saved the recording, turned off the TV, and went to the basement. Pulling out a 3-piece luggage set, I began packing. Before I zipped the suitcase, I grabbed the DVD from the player. My final piece of evidence. With the luggage by the door, I made a call. "How soon can we get the new store up?" I asked my father. "It's already under construction," he replied. "We added a second story with a 3-bedroom apartment. I'm looking at hiring a regional manager." "Good. I'll be running it," I said. There was a brief pause before he spoke again. "You're moving?" "Yeah," I exhaled. "Find me a good civil attorney and one for divorce." There was silence on the other end, and then he asked, "What happened?" I glanced around the house one last time. "I'll explain later. But right now, I need to make sure my wife and her lover don't take my kids from me." I called the old farmer we had bought the land from. "Any chance I can rent a room from you until my place is ready?" I asked. "You've got a room," he replied, "but your money isn't good here." "I insist," I began, but he interrupted me. "Logan," he said firmly, "you and your family did more for us than we ever could have hoped. We owe you big time." I sighed, realizing there was no point in arguing. "All right," I conceded. "I'll be there tomorrow at 10 a.m. The next morning, I sat in my boss's office, handing in my resignation without notice. Jace Whitman studied me, tapping his fingers on his desk. "Care to explain why?" he asked, his voice calm but curious. I didn't want to say it, but there was no turning back now. Without a word, I pulled out my phone and played the video. It showed the fully finished 3rd floor of my home, a space that was never supposed to exist. Then, I swiped through the pictures. His expression hardened as he took it all in. But when I reached the last image, a framed photo of him, his wife, and their son, Derek, his face drained of color. "Where did you get that?" Jace's voice was tight, trying to keep his emotions in check. I swallowed hard. "It was in my house, on the 3rd floor." His breath hitched, and I saw the panic in his eyes as I pressed play on the video. The room fell silent as he watched his son, Derek, take my wife in a way that suggested he owned her. "My God," he muttered, disgust written across his face. "That's sickening." I kept my voice steady. "The woman in that video is my wife, Rachel," I said. "That's why I'm leaving her." Jace's fists clenched on the desk. "This was filmed in that hidden 3rd floor room?" he asked, disbelief creeping into his voice. "Yes," I confirmed. "And someone else recorded it. I don't know who, and I don't care anymore." Jace exhaled deeply, his face a mix of regret and frustration. "I'm sorry, Logan. Because of your son and my wife, I have no choice but to quit. I need to be home if I want a shot at custody of my daughters." He nodded grimly, then picked up his phone. "Cut Logan his final check," he said, "at a $10,000 bonus." I blinked, surprised. "That's not necessary." "It is," he said firmly. Then, lowering his voice, he added, "Tell no one about this. After you cash your check, come straight back to my office." He paused and asked, "Are the kids his or yours?" "They both take after Rachel," I admitted. "But I think they're mine." "I don't believe the affair's been going on for that long." Jace rubbed his temples. "We've heard rumors about Derek for a while, Logan. The only way to know for sure is a DNA test." I met his gaze. "Then I suggest your son request one," I said flatly. Jace sighed. "Let Rachel sweat for a while. I want her to figure out tonight that you know." I nodded. "Understood." Before I left, he stopped me. "Logan," he said quietly, "I don't condone what Derek did. When he comes back in 2 weeks, he's gone." Later, I would learn Jace kept his word. He not only fired Derek but also cut him out of his will. For Jace, betraying a trusted employee, especially like this, was unforgivable. After cashing my check, I emptied our joint accounts, paid off my bill at Jameson's Auto, and headed to my daughter's school. I met with the guidance counselor before they were called out of class. When she started to leave, I stopped her. "You should stay," I said. She hesitated, sensing something was off. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Yes," I replied firmly. "I don't want anyone accusing me of manipulating my kids." Her expression shifted, and I could tell she was uneasy. "Are you worried about that happening?" she asked. I sighed, my frustration showing. "My wife is a state social worker," I said quietly. Her eyes widened, her lips tightening. When the girls arrived, they immediately talked about their new Uncle Jake, how he had been renting upstairs for the past 3 years. He used to keep to himself, Samantha said, but after a while, he just became part of the family. Mom said he was a distant cousin who moved back to town, my other daughter added. My jaw tightened, but I held it together. The counselor shifted, uncomfortable. We never saw anything inappropriate, she said, hesitating. But your wife often came downstairs from the 3rd floor in the mornings. We figured they were sleeping together, Samantha added nonchalantly. Then Mom told us to start calling him Uncle Jake. My younger daughter chimed in. A cold anger gripped me. Listen to me, I said, my voice firm. Derek Whitman is not your uncle. He's not related to you at all. Both girls stared at me, confusion shifting to shock. I took a deep breath before continuing. He's your mother's lover. And because of that, we're getting a divorce. I explained that, due to my job, I couldn't gain primary custody right away, but I would fight for them when I had a stable job. The counselor nodded. Everything your father said is true, she assured them. After hugging my daughters goodbye, I turned to leave. The counselor handed me a slip of paper. Have your lawyer contact me, she said. I'll give a statement. I've seen too many men get screwed in their divorce. I thanked her and left. Next, I drove to a flower shop. I need the deadest flowers you've got, I told the florist. She hesitated, confused. Excuse me, she asked. I want them boxed like a regular bouquet, I said. She frowned. Sir, why? It's a gag gift, I lied, trying to keep it light. A worker brought out a bundle of wilted, browning flowers. These work? She asked. They're perfect, I replied. I had them boxed and delivered to the house. When I arrived, I placed the bouquet on the master bed, next to the handmade card for my daughters that read, We love you, Uncle Jake. Then, I carefully laid out Rachel's baby doll lingerie, the same one I had once shredded with her sewing scissors. After packing what I needed, I loaded my suitcases into my truck and secured a tarp over the bed. As I was tying it down, my neighbor, Ted, walked over. I guess you didn't know about Rachel's second husband like the rest of us, he said with a raised eyebrow. I frowned. Second husband? Common law, at least, he replied. Did you know about him? Just found out today, he admitted. But it's been going on for at least 3 years. The weight of his words hit me hard. 3 years, I repeated. I quit my job today, I said, my voice steady despite the anger building inside. I need to prove to the court that I can be there for my daughters. Ted listened quietly as I explained. Derek was never around when I was home. There was no way for me to know unless we were both in town at the same time, and that never happened. I exhaled deeply. He's the boss's son. His father found out today when I walked into his office and quit. Ted's expression darkened. You did the right thing, Logan. No doubt about it. We talked for a while longer before Ted made a suggestion. Why don't you move your truck into my garage? He asked. If you watch her tonight, you might get a better idea of your next steps. You think so? I asked, slightly skeptical. Yeah, he said, leave before daylight. Slip out before anyone knows you were even here. I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. All right, let's do it. It turned out to be the right decision. From Ted's garage, I had the perfect view. I watched as my wife of 13 years pulled into the driveway. Her car must have been in the shop. She walked inside, heading straight to the bedroom, just like she always did. That's when she saw what I'd left on the bed. At first, she smiled, thinking it was from Derek. Through the binoculars, I saw the joy on her face as she picked up the handmade card from our daughters. We love you, Uncle Derek, she read, and set it aside. Then she reached for the baby doll lingerie she bought just for him. Her smile faltered when she realized it had been cut to ribbons. She stared at it, confused, and then I saw the shift in her expression, concern. Why would Derek do this? Why would he leave something like this in my bedroom? Doubt crept in. She pushed the pieces of the flower box aside and opened it. The rotten smell hit her immediately. She gagged, recoiling. For a moment, she looked like she might be sick, but she still didn't get it. Her confusion told me she hadn't yet considered that I was the one who left it. She thought it was some sort of message from Derek, maybe a breakup, maybe something else. Just then, my phone vibrated. It was a text from Emily, calling you, but don't answer. We want you to hear what we say to Mom. She needs to hear the truth, just like you taught us. I put the phone on speaker, explained to Ted, and told him we needed to stay quiet to hear everything. The front door opened, and my daughters walked in from the school bus, heading straight to Rachel's bedroom. She was still standing there, trying to make sense of everything. Dad had us called out of class today, Samantha started. Rachel stiffened, her whole body tensing. She hadn't expected this. We met in the school counselor's office, Samantha continued. We were confused because you said Dad wouldn't be home until 6. Then he asked Miss Bennett to stay. Emily added, The color drained from your face when we told you the first thing he asked was who Uncle Derek was and how long he'd been living with us. Rachel swallowed, the weight of the moment sinking in. I told him you said Derek was a distant cousin who had just moved back to town, Samantha continued, her voice wavering. Rachel's breath grew heavier. Dad had no idea the third floor was finished, Emily added. You told us it was a surprise for him. But now we understand it wasn't. We kept our promise not to tell, Emily said, and wow, it sure was a surprise to Dad. Rachel's body went rigid, a visible panic setting in. He told us he didn't know about the third floor until today, Emily continued. Her lips parted slightly, realization dawning. You always told us not to lie, Emily said, her voice turning cold. But I guess it's okay for you to lie to us and Dad. Rachel started crying. Tears streamed down her face. Dad didn't know Uncle Derek had been living upstairs for 3 years, Samantha added, her voice quiet but strong. Rachel tried to speak, but no words came out. We had to explain that while he was on the road, you never slept in the bed you shared with him, Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. You always slept upstairs, Samantha finished. Rachel's face turned ghostly pale. It was the smallest thing, the perfectly made bed, that had exposed everything. You always told us to make our beds every morning, Emily said. That habit is what gave you away. We never caught you with Uncle Derek, Samantha said, but we did see you coming downstairs in the mornings when Dad wasn't home. Rachel sobbed, burying her face in her hands. Dad told us you, and you're getting a divorce, Samantha said, her tone sad but resolute. He told us Derek isn't our uncle. He's your long-term lover, the one you hid from him. Dad said you used him to support Derek, Emily added, her voice shaking. That you kept him in a lifestyle that only benefited you too. That means our whole life with you has been a lie. Rachel broke down completely. He told us we have to live with you until he finds a new job, Samantha said softly. He quit today so he could get custody of us. The school counselor told us the court wouldn't grant custody to a long-distance truck driver, Emily said. So he's changing careers. Rachel's sobs grew louder, louder with each word. He said goodbye, and we went back to class, Samantha finished. Rachel sat on the bed, trembling. She knew it was true now. She knew Logan was making all the right moves for the legal battle ahead. As a social worker, she understood exactly what the court would look for in a custody case. And in this situation, Logan had a strong chance of winning. We broke down in class, Samantha said, her voice distant. So Miss Bennett pulled us out for the rest of the day. She tried to calm us down, but we had a long conversation about everything. We learned that sleeping with another man while married is infidelity, Mother, Emily said coldly. Miss Bennett said it's the ultimate betrayal. Samantha added, and judging by your reaction, you don't even seem sorry. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Rachel flinched, her face contorting in pain as her daughter's words landed hard. Miss Bennett told us she wondered how you thought you could get away with living with 2 husbands for so long, Emily said, her voice hardening. Rachel shook her head, whispering, I don't have 2 husbands. I have one, Logan, and a live-in lover. Then it hit her. That's exactly how the world saw it. She had used Logan as a provider while keeping another man in her bed. In Logan's eyes, she had played him for a fool. And knowing his pride, there was only one way this would end, divorce. Samantha spoke up again, her voice firm. Emily and I talked about everything you've done, and we've decided something. Rachel barely lifted her head, and then Samantha hit her with the final blow. Mom, we may be 12 now, but soon we'll be old enough to decide where we want to live. Emily added, Miss Bennett said when we're 13, we can legally choose. And we're choosing Dad. We're calling Grandma to come get us, Samantha continued. She and Grandpa will let us stay with them until Dad has everything sorted. That way, you and Derek can have the whole house to yourselves. Rachel looked crushed, her face crumbling with disbelief. Come on, sis, we need to pack, Emily said, turning to leave. But Samantha stopped and glanced back one last time. One final question, Mother. Rachel lifted her tear-streaked face, unable to stop the oncoming storm. Did you deliberately push us to get close to Uncle Derek so we'd accept him as your second husband, all while hiding it from Dad? Samantha's question hung in the air like a hammer. Rachel's lips parted, but no words came out. Samantha wasn't done, because that's sure what it looks like. With that, she turned and walked out, leaving Rachel sobbing uncontrollably on the bed. My daughters headed downstairs to call their grandmother. Through my binoculars, I watched it all unfold. My girls had inherited my gift of seeing through the lies. They pieced together every detail, and the truth was clear. I took out my phone and sent Rachel a text. What you found on the bed was my doing. Let Derek know I'll be suing him for co-support of you and the kids. I watched through the lenses as Rachel read the text. Her face twisted in shock and realization. The thought of everything being exposed, the lies, the manipulation, the hidden life, was hitting her hard. Her expression was a mixture of defeat and fear. She knew she was done for. If I followed through with the suit, it would ruin Derek financially and entangle him with her forever. 15 minutes later, my in-laws arrived. Ted cracked open the front door to eavesdrop. We didn't have to try hard. Their shouting was loud enough. Rachel's mother was enraged, practically shaking with fury, as she ushered the girls out of the house. But it was my father-in-law who made the situation painfully clear. Now that you've pushed Logan out of your life, he sneered, I guess you'll be looking for another long-haul driver to replace him once things go south with Derek. Rachel's desperation showed as she shook her head. Dad, it's not Don't, he interrupted, his voice sharp. Derek doesn't respect you. He's willing to share you with others. And you've made it clear that no man is ever enough for you. Rachel collapsed in tears, shaking uncontrollably as her father's words cut deep. We're calling child services tomorrow, her mother snapped. We need to figure out how to handle this. Rachel was breathless, her face pale. It was our granddaughters who called us, her mother continued. They told us why they wanted out. She turned to the girls, her voice softening. I've never been prouder of you two, she said, before turning to Rachel with cold disappointment. Someone clearly raised them right, and it wasn't you. Ted quietly shut the door, walked into the kitchen, grabbed 2 beers, and handed me one. I took a long drink, trying to clear my mind, before he spoke. Your daughter's got it right, Logan, he said. You should be proud. I nodded, looking at the beer in my hand. I am. Ted leaned against the counter. When the renovations were going on upstairs, Rachel told us you were renting out the space because you needed money. But the house was paid off. You didn't need money. You were just taking your time with the work. I frowned. I hadn't known where this was going. We didn't need the money. We were taking our time, making sure everything was done right. Ted's eyes darkened. So, she lied from the start. Yeah, I confirmed, taking another sip. She and Derek planned this from the beginning. Ted shook his head in disgust. Where did the money come from then? Probably Derek's trust fund, I said, not surprised. He probably repaid it once he had access to the money. I opened my phone and started typing. Ted, let me know if you spot her. I'm about to send a text and I need to see her reaction. A few minutes later, Ted spoke. She's back in her room. Looks like she's calmed down a bit. I nodded. All right, sending it now. I hit send. The message read, Hey, thought you'd want to know. Jace Whitman and I both want to know, since your relationship with his son has lasted this long, are Samantha and Emily mine, or are they Derek's? Jace is filing a lawsuit to find out. Ted peered through the binoculars. Oh my God, she lost it. I tensed. What's she doing? She just threw her phone at the wall, he said, pausing to watch. Now she's face down on the bed, sobbing. Ted lowered the binoculars and walked back into the kitchen, shaking his head with a grin. What the hell did you text her? I took a slow sip of my coffee. I just asked her and Jace if Samantha and Emily are mine, or Derek's. Ted let out a low whistle. Jesus. Jace told me he's heard rumors for years about his son being involved with a married woman, and her husband having no clue. I continued. I just asked a question that needed to be answered for all of us. Ted's face paled, realizing the weight of what Jace could do. If Jace wants the truth, he won't stop until he gets it, he muttered. Even if it means taking it all the way to the Supreme Court. About half an hour later, I turned to Ted again. Check on her. He glanced through the binoculars. She's in the living room now, sitting on the couch. Perfect, I said, pulling out my phone. I sent another text, a 5-minute video, the one from the TV, showing Derek's face clearly at the end. A moment later, I followed up with, I took the disc. When I watch the whole thing, maybe I'll figure out who filmed it. Ted let out a slow breath. Rachel's losing it again. Oh, crap. She just threw up on the rug. I didn't say a word. I'd seen enough. At 5 in the morning, I drove out of town. Before leaving, I sent every shred of evidence I had gathered to friends, family, and coworkers. The message was simple. This is what I showed Jace Whitman when he asked why I resigned. The second video was recorded in the same room, but with an unknown cameraman. Neighbors claimed Derek Whitman is Rachel's second husband, and she told them I agreed to it. That's a lie. I just found out yesterday. I'm filing for divorce and suing Derek Whitman. It was going to be a rough morning for a lot of people. I stopped at a truck stop on the edge of town and ordered a hearty breakfast. I parked my truck where I could keep an eye on it through the window as I ate. My mind was still spinning when a familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. "I'm sorry, Logan. No man deserves what happened to you." I looked up. Natalie, Rachel's younger sister, stood there, hesitating. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. I nodded, and she slid into the booth across from me. She took a deep breath before speaking. "Mom and Dad told me everything last night. The girls didn't hold back. Just so you know, we had no idea. We were blindsided." I exhaled. "I believe you. If you change your number, please let us know. We won't give it to Rachel. I'm keeping it the same." She hesitated, then asked, "Logan, what was my sister thinking?" I studied her for a moment before answering. "I was planning to quit trucking in 2 months anyway. My girls are growing up. I wanted to be home for them." I shook my head. As for Rachel, maybe it started small. Maybe it escalated. Either way, she clearly enjoyed it. Natalie clenched her jaw. "From what I've heard, this went on longer than 3 years." I looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "Jace told me when you resigned that he'd heard rumors for years about his son messing around with a married woman." I sighed. "He asked if Samantha and Emily were Derek's." Natalie's face went pale. "Oh crap. Who else knows?" I pulled out my phone and showed her my text to Rachel, then the message I had sent out that morning. As she read, her eyes turned glassy. "What she did was bad," she whispered. "But this is worse." I nodded. The video proves someone else was involved. Someone filming. I let the weight of that settle. By the end of today, everyone will know. Natalie wiped her eyes. "Jace is going public, isn't he?" I sighed. "Yeah. He won't stop until he gets answers. The truth is, both girls could be mine. Both could be Derek's. Or neither." Natalie swallowed hard. Jesus. Then I asked the question that had haunted me since I first saw the tape. Was the person behind the camera a man or a woman? Natalie held my gaze for a long moment. Then, instead of answering, she slid over to my side of the booth and reached for my hand. We sat in silence until the waitress came to take our order. I let go of her hand and picked up my fork, but I could feel Natalie watching me. She had always been there, through everything. She finally asked, "Where are you going to live?" I set my fork down and looked at her. "Samantha and Emily asked my parents to take them in. They're hurt, but they know what they want. They want to be with me." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "Mom and Dad know you're doing what's best for them. If you'd like, I can bring them to see you on weekends." I offered, reaching into my pocket and handing her a slip of paper. "That's the address of the farm where I'll be staying." Natalie frowned. "Why all the way out there?" "We own 10 acres at a major intersection," I explained. "The plan is to build a gas station and convenience store. Right now, there's nothing out there, but it's going to be a prime location as the area grows." She raised an eyebrow. "How'd you even find it?" "Google Maps shows nothing in that area." I leaned back, remembering. I was cutting across the country to save time, saw a sign at a 4-way stop, and followed it. The traffic convinced me it was a smart business move. After we finished eating, I grabbed the check. Natalie leaned in and kissed my cheek, something she had always done. "Just remember, Logan," she said softly, "a lot of us have always loved you for the man you are." On the drive, I called my father. He promised to get me a top-tier divorce lawyer. I had 75 more miles to go. I arrived at the construction site around 8:30. Dad was going big, 8 fuel pumps for passenger vehicles, 2 for big rigs, and the foundation for the convenience store already in place. The second floor, a 2,400 square foot apartment, was framed. That told me he saw real potential here. After a couple of hours, I headed to the farm. Wayne Douglas greeted me with a grin, his eyes going straight to my truck. "Now that's a truck," he said. Back when real metal mattered. His wife was setting the table and immediately insisted I eat. It was a true farmer's meal, hearty and filling. She laughed at how much I put away. After lunch, I helped clean up. While drying the dishes, she finally noticed. "You're not wearing your wedding ring." By the time we finished, coffee was ready. I spent the next 2 hours explaining everything that had happened. Wayne nodded. "The girls are welcome anytime. Be nice having kids around again. Gives me someone to grill for." I texted Natalie. "Come every Friday and stay till Sunday. The girls are welcome here." She replied instantly. "It's a date." Later that night, I watched the full video. The cameraman never showed their face. That left me wondering who was behind the camera. The question gnawed at me. Using my phone's Wi-Fi, I sent everything to my father, along with Miss Bennett's contact information. I added a simple instruction. Find out where Derek is and get him served ASAP. Rachel can be served at work. Video attached. Then, just to twist the knife, I sent Rachel a text. Watch the whole thing. Not much to brag about. Others have done better. Natalie and the girls left straight after school. They kept me updated every 10 to 15 minutes during the drive. The last text came as they reached the farm. I stood at the driveway, waiting. The moment Natalie's car came to a stop, Samantha and Emily bolted toward me, throwing their arms around me. Wayne and Diane stepped out to greet them. The girls were thrilled with the room Diane had set up for them. Wayne took them on a tour while Diane finished making dinner. After we ate, I started cleaning up. My daughters stood beside me at the sink, washing dishes while Diane silently observed, taking it all in. Wayne took the girls aside, telling them about the massive swing set, the swimming pond, and the small motorcycles they could learn to ride, if I approved. I had worried about how they would adjust, but Wayne and Diane had already thought of everything. Once the kids were in bed, Natalie and I sat outside. It's been a crazy couple of days, she said, stretching her legs out. All hell's broken loose. I took a slow sip of coffee. What's happening now? Everything's coming out. She hesitated. Derek was the boy Rachel used to sneak out to see when we were kids. That's how long this has been going on. I shook my head. That explains a lot. You were her safety net, Natalie continued. Derek was the one she craved, but she never realized he was using that against her. I exhaled, rubbing my temples. Derek won't stick around. He'll leave Rachel with what she deserves. Which is? Nothing. She nodded. Mom and Dad spoke to child services. If you give written consent, they'll keep the girls until you find a permanent home. I swallowed hard. And Rachel? Child services interviewed the girls privately. They've determined that, based on Rachel's choices, they cannot recommend her for custody. Tears burned the back of my eyes. The reality of it finally hit me. Natalie saw it and reached for my hand. Do you want me to leave you alone? I shook my head, unable to form words. She stayed beside me, her grip firm, offering comfort without saying a word. Meanwhile, across town, Rachel sat at her kitchen table, shattered. Thursday had been quiet. By Friday, everything had imploded. Jace had her served, at work. He was taking her to court. He wanted a DNA test. And the worst part? She didn't know the answer. It had been so long since the twins were conceived that she genuinely couldn't remember. She had ignored my warnings, dismissing them as nothing more than rage. But it wasn't the lawsuit that destroyed her. It was the text I had sent to everyone we knew. She had never once considered Derek her second husband, but her lawyer made it clear, under state law, he was. The moment he moved in, their relationship became common law. After a year, he had the same legal rights as a married spouse. That meant my lawsuit had teeth. The only question was, how much was Derek going to have to pay? Her lawyer laid it out in simple terms. The courts would favor me in the divorce. I had been deceived for years. The evidence was overwhelming. Had Rachel charged Derek rent and kept records, she might have had a defense. But there was nothing. To the courts, Derek was just a freeloader she had supported using my income. As Rachel was leaving her office, the real bombshell dropped. Her supervisor called her back. Rachel, we need to talk. Uneasy, she sat down. Her supervisor's expression remained unreadable. On Thursday, I was called to the Caldwell home regarding a custody issue. They explained the situation and asked for guidance. Rachel's stomach twisted. After speaking with the children, I advised them that if they obtained written authorization from their father, we would recognize them as temporary guardians. She felt her chest tighten. I know they're your parents, her supervisor continued, but given the circumstances, I can't let you continue handling child welfare cases. Effective immediately, you're reassigned to office duty. Turn over your case files. Rachel blinked, barely processing what was happening. I can't fire you, her supervisor said with a sigh, but no one will trust you after this. Not in this line of work. Rachel sat there, numb. She had spent years making reckless choices, thinking there would never be consequences. Now, one by one, they were closing in on her. Saturday passed in a blur. Samantha and Emily couldn't have been happier, their laughter echoing through the farm as Wayne showed them how to handle the small motorcycles. They caught on quickly, tearing across the yard with grins on their faces. After 2 hours, Wayne clapped his hands together. That's enough for today. You'll be feeling it tomorrow. The girls exchanged a look. Go on, Wayne smirked. Jump in the pond and cool off. Diane and Natalie watched from the porch, smiling as the girls sprinted toward the water. By the afternoon, they were inside, helping with dinner. I checked in, wanted to make sure they were comfortable. In the kitchen, all four, Diane, Natalie, Samantha, and Emily, stood around the table, peeling potatoes and chopping onions for the salad. Outside, Wayne had the grill going, steak sizzling. I pitched in where I could. Dinner was served at the picnic table. Steak, potato salad, baked beans. I noticed something. No TV. No phones. Just conversation, laughter, and real connection. By 8, the girls called it a night. "We're exhausted," Emily mumbled through a yawn. After they went to bed, the rest of us stayed up, playing cards and sharing a few beers before finally turning in. By Sunday afternoon, Natalie and the girls packed up to leave. Before getting in the car, she handed me a signed letter, witnessed by Wayne and Diane, granting her parents temporary custody rights. Early Monday, Martin Caldwell called. "I took the letter to the office myself," he said. "They made copies for the records and issued a legal notice. We now have full authority to act on behalf of the girls." We talked for a while before the conversation turned to Rachel and Derek. It was only a matter of time before the walls completely closed in. I found out a lot that I hadn't known before. By Friday morning, Derek was in Austin, Texas, picking up a medical shipment when he was served. That same day, Rachel was served at her job. I was out for a walk when my phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Have you calmed down enough to talk?" I didn't hesitate to respond. "There's nothing left to say. Your parents and Natalie told me everything from sneaking out to see Derek as kids to where we are now. If he was always the one, why did you marry me?" She never answered. That evening, when Natalie pulled into the driveway with the girls, I wasn't sure who was more excited, me or them. They ran straight into my arms the second they got out of the car. Natalie stepped out, her smile as bright as ever, and before I knew what was happening, she kissed me. Not on the cheek. Not a quick peck. It was firm, full, and completely unexpected. I blinked, stunned, but before I could react, she grinned mischievously. "You need to hear what the girls are about to ask," she whispered. Her hand had somehow slipped into mine as we turned to face them. Samantha and Emily stood hesitantly in front of Wayne and Diane, exchanging nervous glances. Finally, Emily spoke. "Would it be okay if we called you Grandpa and Grandma?" Samantha quickly added, "Only if you're comfortable with it." Wayne's face lit up instantly. Of course. What none of us expected was Diane's reaction. Her eyes welled up with tears, her hands trembling slightly. Later, I found out why. She had never been able to have children. Those few simple words from my daughters gave her something she had never thought she would experience in her lifetime. After dinner, I told Natalie it was official. Rachel and Derek had both been served. Then, I showed her Rachel's last message and my response. She sighed, shaking her head. "You know my sister can't explain her choices. If she tried, she'd have to admit the truth to herself." I exhaled, rubbing a hand down my face. "Enough about your sister. When are you going to find someone who actually loves you the way you deserve?" She gave me a small smile. "Don't be surprised, but I already have." I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah? And what's stopping you?" She smirked, getting him to realize it. The next morning, Wayne and I sat outside, drinking coffee. "Out of nowhere," he said, "Diane is my second wife." I frowned. "Yeah, my first wife was her sister. She did me wrong, just like Rachel did to you." I studied him carefully. "And you're telling me this why?" He set his mug down. "Don't let your pain blind you to what's right in front of you. Natalie's been there for you from the start. Ask yourself why." His words stayed with me. For the first time, I really let myself think about it. Natalie had always been my closest friend, the one person I could count on. Had she wanted more all along? And if she did, why hadn't I noticed before? I looked back at him. "What made you realize Diane was the one?" Wayne chuckled. "A cast iron frying pan to the head." I raised an eyebrow. He laughed. "Caught a neighbor girl flirting with me. Diane put an end to that real quick." He leaned back, sipping his coffee. "Since we couldn't have kids, we fostered for years. But no matter what, she was always my rock." Our conversation ended when the house started to wake up. After breakfast, the girls rode motorcycles for hours before deciding it was time for a swim. We all headed down to the pond. Wayne and Diane settled into lawn chairs while the rest of us splashed around with a beach ball in the water. Natalie looked incredible in a white bikini, her auburn hair tucked behind her ears. I had never noticed before how effortlessly she moved, how natural it was for her to be here, in my life. Wayne's words had planted something in my head, and I couldn't shake it. The pond was deeper than I had expected, fed by a small creek. Wayne had reinforced the edges with railroad ties, creating a natural waterfall. Our first game of beach volleyball turned into a fierce competition, one adult, one kid per team. Laughter, playful taunts, nothing but pure fun. It felt good. Just us. Each of my daughters took turns having me dive underwater, lift them onto my shoulders, and launch them into the air. Their laughter echoed through the trees, and in that moment, I knew exactly why I had left trucking behind. Eventually, Wayne and Diane got up. "We're starting supper," Wayne announced. The girls ran off to help, leaving Natalie and me alone in the water. I grinned, ducked under, and resurfaced between her legs, flipping her over. She came up laughing, slicking her hair back. Without hesitation, she moved closer. Her blue eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something different. Neither of us spoke as I leaned in, and she tilted her chin up to meet me. Our lips met in a slow, deep kiss. It was unlike anything I had ever felt before. There was more emotion in that one moment than I had ever experienced with Rachel. "Wow," I whispered. "That was intense." Natalie smiled. "You have no idea how long I've waited for this." She pressed against me, the water surrounding us as we kissed again, deeper this time. Our tongues met in a slow, intoxicating rhythm. For the first time in years, I felt something real. We were so lost in each other that we didn't hear Wayne shouting from the shore. "Supper in 20 minutes. Reluctantly, we pulled apart, grinning as we waded toward the edge. As soon as we walked inside, Diane took one look at us and smirked. "Well, it's about time." Natalie flushed red. Diane turned to Wayne. "What finally clued him in?" He chuckled. "Told him about your legendary cast iron frying pan." The twins overheard and immediately wanted to hear the full story. Wayne had no choice but to sit them down and explain how he and Diane had ended up together. I leaned back against the counter, watching the scene unfold. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about the past. I was looking forward to the future. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, Natalie and I sat on the back porch swing, the stars scattered across the sky above us. I draped an arm around her, and she leaned into me, resting her head against my shoulder. "Mom figured it out," she murmured. "Figured what out?" "That I'm happier than I've been in years." She smiled softly. She noticed the moment I brought the twins home last week. "I guess my poker face isn't as good as I thought." I exhaled. How did she take it? With everything going on, I imagined she'd have some concerns. She asked if anything had happened between us yet. I told her no. I glanced at her. And then, she just asked how long I'd been in love with you. I stiffened slightly, turning my head to look at her. "What did you say?" She chuckled. "Since the summer before you married, Rachel." I blinked. "That long?" She nodded. "And it took all of this for you to finally see it?" I was expecting her to say she got a lecture from her mother. Instead, she sighed. All she said was, "If it works out, I'll make sure your father accepts it." Then she told me something I never knew. Our dad was actually her sister's throwaway. She thanks her for that every day. Sunday afternoon, as Natalie and the girls packed up, I kissed her goodbye. That's when Emily turned to Samantha and, loud enough for us both to hear, said, "Aunt Natalie's been in love with Dad for years. It took what Mom did for him to finally see it. If she gets her way, they'll be married as soon as he's divorced." Samantha's eyes widened. As they drove off, I shook my head. How did my daughter know before I did? Wayne chuckled beside me. "Let's take a walk." We crossed the property, following the small wooden bridge that spanned the creek. Wayne stopped at a plot of land that had originally been part of the main acreage. "This would be a perfect spot for a house," he said. That way, Samantha and Emily could come over whenever they wanted, ride bikes, ride the horses. I turned to him. Whose idea was this? Diane and Natalie. They started planning this morning. Thought they'd spring it on you next week. He laughed, shaking his head. Monday morning, Martin called me first thing. Jace got a court order for blood samples from the girls. I sighed. Figured that was coming. I had to explain everything I knew to him, Martin continued. He was devastated. He thought Rachel had only been involved with Derek for 3 years. He had no idea how far back it went. I rubbed my forehead. How did he take it? Martin hesitated. Not well. He stormed into the social services office and in front of everyone, told Rachel she was dead to him. I closed my eyes. I had expected anger, but not that. Later, I called my mother-in-law. She got straight to the point. Miss Bennett already gave your lawyer a notarized statement, she said. One less thing to worry about. Derek's due back Wednesday, she added. Think you should be here? I considered my options. I'll think about it, I replied before hanging up. Then I rang Ted. Ted, Any chance I can stay at your place Tuesday night? Of course, he said without hesitation. Got some things to share with you anyway. As I spoke, Wayne overheard and tossed me his truck keys. Take my truck so you won't be recognized. I shook my head. Only if you take mine and take your wife out for the day. Wayne grinned. You're pretty damn smart for a young feller. By dusk, I had slipped into town unnoticed. Before pulling into Ted's driveway, I gave him a quick call. The moment I stepped inside, he handed me a pair of binoculars and pointed toward my old house. She's got another visitor. I adjusted the focus, and my stomach dropped. Even in the dim light, I recognized the man immediately, Derek's older, married brother. Jesus Christ, I muttered. She's really outdone herself this time. Ted gave a slow nod. He's been coming around a lot since you left. I didn't hesitate. I knew exactly what needed to be done. I pulled out my phone and called Jace. Logan, he answered, surprised. I need you to come to this address. Now. 20 minutes later, he pulled up. Without a word, I handed him the key to my old house. Go see for yourself, I said. And I also found out who was behind the camera filming Derek and Rachel. They're upstairs right now. Jace didn't say a word. He just walked toward the house. Ted watched from the window. What do you think he's going to do? I took a deep breath. Jace is a proud man. It depends on how much his pride can take before it breaks him. We waited in silence. Then we heard a bang. Ted and I bolted upright. Crap, he muttered, reaching for his phone. I'm calling emergency. Minutes later, red and blue lights lit up the street. Fire trucks. An ambulance. We stepped outside, watching the chaos unfold. Then we saw her. Rachel was dragged out of the house, half-dressed, screaming. Derek's brother, also half-clothed, was handcuffed and shoved into a squad car. But our laughter died when they wheeled Jace out on a stretcher. Ted ran inside, grabbing his police scanner. Moments later, he shook his head. Jace busted into the bedroom. Brian thought it was a break-in. Shot him in the shoulder. We stepped back outside just as Rachel spotted me. She had managed to throw some clothes on, but when her eyes met mine, all the color drained from her face. Ted let out a low whistle. She was screwing both brothers. I sighed. I knew there was a third person, but I didn't know who. Ted shook his head. I feel bad for Jace. He didn't deserve this. No one does. By 6 the next morning, I pulled into my in-laws' driveway. Martin was already up. Over coffee, before the house stirred, I told him everything that had happened. His wife, Helen, was stunned when she saw me but quickly pulled me into a hug. Samantha and Emily rushed downstairs, thrilled to see me. I took them to school before heading back. Martin had already left, so Helen and I sat down for a long talk. By the end of it, we had both reached the same conclusion. Rachel had never loved me at all. Later, I visited Jace at his home, where he was recovering. His wife's eyes welled up with tears the moment she saw me. Without hesitation, I pulled her into a hug. Jace chuckled. Logan always keeps his cool. I smirked. One thing I can say, I've never seen him lose his temper. Jace laughed. Brian's in jail. Derek's broke. It's a mess. He exhaled. Want to come back as management? I shook my head. I appreciate it, but I'm done with trucking. I've got a new life to build. That afternoon, I watched as Derek signed out of the transportation center for the last time. His career was over. Watching him storm out in anger was deeply satisfying. That night, I surprised Natalie at work with a dozen red roses. Her eyes filled with tears when she saw me. Over dinner, Ted called. Derek got home before Rachel and was waiting for her, he said grimly. Drank himself stupid. He's blaming her for everything. My stomach tightened. Ted. Neighbor called the cops, he continued. Rachel didn't make it. The hardest thing I had ever done was tell my daughters their mother was gone. It's been 5 years. I watched Samantha and Emily waiting for the bus while Natalie, now my wife, chases our 2 preschool boys around the yard. The gas station and convenience store have become the heart of our little town. At the crossroads, Wayne put up a sign. We're all here because of circumstances.